Oh, and good evening. I'm reporting for the BBC, but no, this is I'm hoping to read Noam Chomsky's syntactic structure and learn the differences in language in countries such as Africa, um, I guess Germany, America, um, and things like that. So to start us off, we'll start with propaganda and then move to some coding and then read a syntactic structure with an introduction by Leo McGarry. Um, so if you just type in, you know, so like America's propaganda was school shootings, um, which is interesting because, if you look at like Iran, there's public executions. That's debatable, but there tend to be. Also, stonings of women is common in Muslim countries. So one of the easiest critiques of America is guns. There's conceal and carry laws in America, so you're allowed to carry concealed weapons, um, especially in your car. However, you don't hear about many arrests due to gun violence. It's more school shootings. Then what happened is it completely stopped. Due to what law? I'm not sure. So if you look at India and you look up like rape, there's Al Jazeera, a reputable news source. Um, and again, this is 2021, 2022, um, for charged with rape, murder of a 9-year-old girl. And the zealotry is really important because it indicates that just like America is criticized for being anti-Muslim, um, so is India. Um, so a priest and three other men were charged in the lowercase 9-year old girl. They're generally in public. Um, when 23-year-old Jyothi Singh was hurt by the driver of the Delhi bus she was traveling on, so on a bus, right? And then on Facebook, a hospital in Delhi allegedly removed the organs of a 5-year-old girl and stuffed her body with polythene bags, leading to her death. Right, so if you remove someone's organ, they're dead. Um, so New York Times. I think I was in Savannah when I read this. By a metal rod. So again, now we go to YouTube. The Guardian. India's Daughter is a documentary. So we can look there. Um, which just speaks to the marriage, kind of civilization of India. It really speaks to misunderstandings between men and women, and then probably also some misunderstanding. India, for instance, the national language of India is English. That's the language of India. Um, it should probably be Hindi. Um, India is also considered dry in many places. There's no alcohol. Um, so they don't have any drug problem or any alcoholism there. Um, Women continue to wear chanya cholis while men wear suits. Men no longer wear kurtas there. Um, Even in Saudi Arabia, they wear um, robes or whatever. Um, in the South, in Kerala, The Life of Pi is one of my favorite films. It's about a boy. It could be Dev Patel. No, but it's by Ang Lee. It's about a boy, who, in a storm is swept on a boat, loses his parents. It's a good movie too. The book's not bad. And um, are there islands off the south of India? It's yes. One of the islands is Jakarta. As for who lives in Jakarta, we'll find out. But there are islands like Cuba where you just don't need to go unless they're right off. So the tiger is called Richard Parker. So he's on a boat with the tiger named Richard Parker and like birds and a few other animals. And he kind of gets to a mangrove in these islands after a long and kind of heinous journey. There's a tarpaulin, which is a spread like for camping. The hyena kills the zebra and later the orangutan. Richard Parker suddenly emerges from under the tarpaulin. In America, it's known as Jumanji with Kirsten Dunst. Again, Robin Williams. Um, and it's pretty hard to explain, but it's about a board game that a brother and sister play, and out comes Richard Parker, Robin, and every role, like monkeys come, hateful squirrels, jumping alligators, and they kind of have to figure it out until the game ends. It starts at a shoe shop, like Death of a Salesman. So it was probably written by you know, from what I know, in Harlem, there's a band called Dollface, and it was written by one of their members. Um, anyways, so the reason I bring that up is because of Node. So when I was reading this for the last 6 years, I read it as node removal. I thought it meant like we had to remove an organ. Um, but that's not true. As I just pulled up Noam Chomsky's syntactic structures, and in this, um, David Lightfoot, here's like a formula where I guess it's talking about violations, you know, violations, such as like, so one of the things you do in the study of terrorism is study correlations. So the study of like see me after class you know, to like film studies, too much film studies or things like that, are tough, but it could be over one. But here we see the measure of elegance equals the number of nodes. So that's cool. Um, we'll move on. Mendelian gen Mendelian genetics. Again, B.F. Skinner, right? On binding. So how do I go about this, right? I read this kind of stuff and see what I'm interested in. Try to start with this kind of stuff. One thing I did read was a really technical paper on music structure. Um, so let's go to 92. 9 to 2. Those are my optimal hours of work. Something I'm happy to agree upon. Like 6 to 9 would be tough. 7 to 7 even tougher. I had a cold, but I'm feeling better. We have now found cases of sentences that are understood in more than one way and are ambiguously represented on the transformational level, though not on other levels, and cases of sentences understood in a similar manner and are similarly represented on the transformational level alone. So when you read out loud, you lose a lot of this, right? This gives an independent justification. Understanding a sentence can be explained in part in terms of the notion of linguistic level. In particular, in order to understand a sentence is easy to necessarily know the kernel sentences from which it originates, more precisely the terminal strings underlying these kernel sentences and the phrase structure of each of these elementary components, as well as so like an introductory clause, right? You might, after 10 pages, be able to understand what's going to come. So there's predictive value. Now we look for, is there a proof? When transformational analysis is more carefully formulated without looking for prediction, we find that knowledge of the transformation represented of a sentence or derived. So, like, the transformation in a graph of a triangle is a similar triangle that's a bigger triangle. So the x and y coordinates change of each of the three places. So if you were to graph, you know, something like a triangle of 5, 5, 5, right? You could then make it 6, 6, 6, and then you could flip it, and that's called a translation, right? You could flip it by making the y axis negative and the x axis positive. So then you look for kind of his modus operandi, kind of like it's kind of like when you feel a fish pull on your rod, right? And for me, with Professor Chomsky, it's not like something like, the major dilemma, Howard, blah, blah, blah. Um, First, it starts with has largely been dominated by a side issue. This issue has been whether or not semantic information is required for discovering or selecting a grammar, but for the challenge usually posed by those who take the affirmative in this dispute. How can you construct a grammar with no appeal to meaning? And because he's a smart guy, you know, it's more about what we were just talking about. There seems to be some type of transformational representation where the kernel pulls on you. What I call it is called a center of gravity. So you underline it. Um, like one thing would be derivative. If you're studying a derivative, you could study this. I'm kind of studying function. So, is, was, you know, and again, there's this. And you stop at misrepresented. And he does it again a great deal. So I'm not interested in that. The question, how can you construct a grammar? So it kind of keeps you on your toes. Intuition is something we've been talking about. And then we get to the technical stuff. So it's like if you have a great philosophical burden of proof, it becomes really tautological. In terms of Searle, it's like if you comply with the, you know, the Uno, then, you know, why I'm not a happy person. And then you read beautiful writing, you got to think about that. Whereas if you get to hear, with Robert Redford, he's saying German minimalism is really based on, for him and myself as well, the idea that uh, with character representation, when you describe characters like in art, like a portrait, you can keep doing it. You can describe um, like 50 notable authors, right? And you can just come up with, and then it changed for him to landscapes, for me, it was landscapes first, and that's why, like, I showed you the movie, right, for Faulkner. Okay, two utterances are phonymically distinctive and only if they differ in meaning. Morphemes are the smallest elements that have meaning. Grammatical sentences are those that have semantic significance. The grammatical relation subject verb I am NP minus VP as an analysis of sentence corresponds to the structural meaning actor action. So this isn't I thou, right? This is I am. The grammatical relation verb object verb NP as analysis of VP corresponds to the structural meaning action goal or action object of action. An active sentence and corresponding passive are synonymous. A phoneme is like faux, um, or neem, like NEFOO. It's, there are consonants, there are vowels, there are syllables. So a syllable is like however. If you can clap, however, that's three syllables. Immediately, that's five syllables. Um, a phoneme is like one more than a syllable. So there's another word, tokens. The utterances in question must be tokens, not cliches. But there are utterances tokens that are mathematically distinct from language. And there are utterance tokens. So here he gets into it again technically. Ectomic, economic, adult, adult, adulation, raison, raisin, ration. So the more you understand, so here would be a heretic, a heretic device, a hermetic device, because I described the river, that, my theology, my music, or more specifically, my literacy is on point. That gives you a little room because this is incredibly dense because he has such a broad audience, right? The idea that this is a strict audience for linguists is kind of ambiguous because one of the choices he made was to be a political theorist and a public intellectual. Then this would all have to be there for those people. So, in such one way, one might hope to determine phonemo distinctus by laborious investigation of the meanings of vast corpus. So, like, when we look at the Communist Manifesto, right, if it was written by an Englishman named Marx or an American president named Abraham Lincoln, right, around 1832, 1850, 1864, right, then we would wonder if he went to Germany. Did he, Abraham Lincoln was the Civil War president. However, it's possible that, um, there were Nazis back then, that he met, or Russians that he met. He could have also been Dr. Freud, right? Dr. Freud is famous for interviewing Europeans, as they were collectively called back then, on nightmares, right? On nightmares, which are horses that come at night, and um, take you into the sky. So, if that were true, we would wonder, where's the Russian economy? If the greatest economist in America, Karl Marx, as John Keynes was English, right? John Keynes was English, I believe. Then, um, how would he get them the book? That's the question. And one of the things Marx did was study the shark, because the shark is an evil animal from a woman's point of view. The other thing he studied that you have to study to understand Russia is robots, robots, like the smoothie approach. And so what he did was drop the book there and watch it with binoculars. There's a great book called Binocular Vision. Um, so without going too much further, we would also ask ourselves, you know, if in Africa, what language do they overall speak, right? There's Afrikaners, they also speak Spanish, they speak Dutch, definitely. Mostly French, right? They mostly speak French. However, the barber slave trade was through the Ivory Coast, either on the top or the bottom, and went through Spain. So they definitely speak Spanish. Now, if you combine them, what you'll find is mostly do they speak the language of John, right? And one of those languages would be Mandarin, right? Mandarin means self hatred, right? Or Tanzanian, right? So one of the places Joseph Goebbels wrote Twilight of the Idols was in Tanzania. So those are two possible languages they speak in Africa. Um, Africa is historically in America, it's considered African American. So most what we understand is the population there are what we call black or Hispanic. Um, Now we're learning today because of Saddam Hussein that the majority might actually be what we call Caucasian or Scandinavian, right? So um, linguistics leads to anthropology studies. Um, and, you know, if it's true, then we might wonder who the true leader of Africa is. But Africa is a continent. And then we might wonder what's the relationship between Africa and Russia, Africa being extremely hot and um, Russia being covered in ice, right? If you look at Siberia, even Moscow, right? So Ukraine is pretty much in Bulgaria, Slovakia,